It began with the sound of knocking. In a farmhouse in upstate New York, in a secluded hamlet called Hydesville, two young girls were visited by ghosts. The year was 1848. Margaretta Fox was 14 years old, and her sister Catherine was 11. During the month of March, in the final weeks of a brutal New York winter, the Fox family started hearing strange sounds emanating throughout their home. Knocks and creaks that were decidedly unnatural. But what was truly bizarre was that the knocking sounds seemed to respond to Maggie and Kate. The family deduced that their home was haunted, and when the girls spoke, the spirit listened. Soon after, they invited a neighbor to visit. Maggie and Kate claimed that the spirit rapping was most discernible at night. With their mother present, the girls spoke with the ghost. They asked the spirit to count certain numbers, which was followed by the eerie sound of knocking throughout the room. If you watched my recent video on the Salem witch trials and the folklore that emerged from that event, then you might find this story familiar. And of course, if you enjoy folklore and ghost stories, then you should definitely subscribe to this channel for more. But like the Salem witch trials, here we have another supernatural allegation being levied by young girls. Had the Fox sisters been living in 1692, then their ability to speak with the dead may have been seen as evidence of demonic possession, or perhaps that they themselves were bewitched. But over 150 years had passed since then, and in certain ways, the United States had deviated drastically from the Puritans' vision. Americans now enjoyed freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and crucially for the Fox sisters, freedom of religion. This diversity of views was well embodied by the Burned-Over District, a region in western New York that earned its name because it was the epicenter of the Second Great Awakening. If you're unfamiliar, the First Great Awakening, which occurred in the mid-1700s, was a Christian reaction against the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. If you're American, you might remember learning in history class about Jonathan Edwards and his 1741 sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. But the Second Great Awakening was a more pluralistic affair. Beginning in the early 1800s, this movement was heavily influenced by Romanticism and emphasized a very personal connection to spirituality. The term burned over derived from the passionate sermons of religious leaders and the wild excitement of congregations. It was a time of new churches, new ideas, and surprising openness to the concept of psychic ability. Meanwhile, in Hydesville, rumors flourished about the Fox sisters and the haunted farmhouse. Folklore usually changes by word of mouth. And the story evolved into a legend of a murdered man who had previously resided on the property and wanted to communicate with the new residents. Perhaps out of fear, their parents decided to move the girls to live with their sister Leah and her husband in Rochester, which lay within the Burned-Over District. Surely now the girls would escape their ghost. But like a spirit imprinting and following you home, the story clung to the Fox sisters. Local newspapers in Rochester circulated the legend of the Hydesville farmhouse. The spirit rapping didn't stop either, and the Fox sisters' psychic abilities, which seemed to have blossomed overnight, caught the attention of local Quakers, including friends of their sister Leah. The Quakers were a progressive sect of Christianity whose members were early supporters of women's suffrage and the abolition of slavery. Some prominent Quakers in Rochester were early champions of the Fox sisters, and this affiliation would shape the Spiritualism movement's ties to abolition and women's rights. On November 14, 1849, the Fox sisters dazzled spectators in Corinthian Hall with their spirit rapping. Their older sister Leah, ever the entrepreneur, realized the commercial potential of mediumship, and she became the girls' manager. The Fox sisters became famous mediums, traveling all over the country and spreading the spiritualist movement along the way. 40 years later, they would admit that the spirit rapping was a hoax in exchange for $1,500 from a reporter. Today, that would be over $50,000. Before an audience of 2,000 people in New York City, Maggie Fox demonstrated how she would crack her joints and her knuckles to produce the sound of knocking. But a year later, she and Kate took it back and claimed that the show in New York was the hoax and the ghosts were real all along. Spiritualism was a movement grounded in the belief that spirits continue to evolve after death and that they can be contacted by skilled mediums. The movement's earliest adherents were inspired by the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, a Swedish scientist and philosopher who began experiencing visions in his 50s. Swedenborg believed that he was in communication with angels, whom he encountered in altered states of consciousness that he achieved through breathing techniques, similar to meditation. He extensively cataloged his experiences in a series of books, including Heaven and Hell, which was published in 1758. An interesting aspect of the spiritualist movement is that most psychics and mediums were women. Figures like the Bangs sisters, Cora L.V. Scott, and Eddie Reet fascinated American audiences. Reet and the Bangs sisters would later be exposed as fraudsters. The movement also spread to other parts of the world, with particular enthusiasm in Britain. Famous spiritualists include Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was the best-selling author of the Sherlock Holmes series, and evolutionary biologist Alfred Russel Wallace, who is credited alongside Charles Darwin with formulating the theory of evolution. Spiritualism developed in the United States in the 1840s and 1850s, but it reached new heights during and after the Civil War. The war remains the United States' bloodiest conflict, with an initial estimation of 620,000 soldiers killed, though some historians now believe the numbers are closer to 750,000 casualties, if not more. These estimates also don't include the tens of thousands of civilians who died during the conflict. With many Americans grieving the loss of a loved one, the ability to contact the dead would have held tremendous appeal. In fact, one adherent was First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln. Her son William died of typhoid fever in 1862, and of course, her husband, Abraham Lincoln, would die a few years later. But around the world, spiritualism provided another balm to the soul: mystery and magic in a rapidly industrializing era. Having a strictly materialist view of the world is unsatisfying for many, if not most people. But the mechanization of everyday life, the smog-enveloped skies, the proliferation of often unsafe factories, working by the clock rather than the rising sun, the new reality was the hiss of steam from a metal valve, whispering that you were only a cog in the wheel. Spiritualism refuted that principle. Towards the end of the 19th century, somewhere between 4 and 11 million Americans identified as spiritualists. The difficulty with finding exact numbers actually lies with spiritualism's diversity. For many believers, spiritualism lied very neatly beside their Christian faith. They weren't opposed to each other. For others, spiritualism was their sole religion. Additionally, in a world where women were excluded from religious leadership, spiritualism gave them a voice and a platform. Soon, believers in spiritualism began organizing conferences, lectures, and even dedicated communities. Most famously, Lilydale, New York, which still exists as a spiritualist community to this day. Of course, spiritualism drew many skeptics, such as Harry Houdini, who worked to expose the many fraudsters and con artists who found their home within the movement. Houdini was especially incensed by mediums who used stage tricks to take advantage of desperate, grieving people. And as a professional magician, he was in a perfect position to expose them. The initial fervor of the spiritualist movement largely died by the 1920s, but its impact on our culture has lingered into the present. To this day, we still have tarot cards, psychic parlors, and occult shops. You can still purchase a Ouija board. Interest in astrology has skyrocketed. Like the spiritualists of the Victorian age, we too are living through times of rapid technological advancement, not all of which has been to our benefit. Perhaps the onslaught of social media, artificial intelligence, and the loneliness of a life online have encouraged some to search for greater meaning in the stars, as our ancestors did centuries ago. It's easy to dismiss the silliness of horoscopes. It's not so easy to dismiss what some may characterize as desire, others as revelation, that we're more than an assemblage of atoms, and that the human spirit is a force that cannot be destroyed, only transformed. The names and the faces and the movements may change, but the mystery endures. If you enjoyed this video and you want to learn more about folklore, please be sure to subscribe and leave a comment if there's a specific story you would like me to cover next. And if you're interested in reading some of my writing, you can check out my Substack at the link below. Be well, and I'll see you next time.